Great. Thanks very much for having me. Hope you can hear me okay. My name is John Choptiany. I'm the Acting Vice President of Global Initiatives, and I lead our climate resilience team as well at IDE. With resilience measurement, it's a very complex topic, and it's been studied for a number of years, but it's really only been the last 5 or maybe 10 years that it's really become to the forefront. There's a lot of considerations to consider. So one being, what are we doing the resilience of? What are we measuring? Is it the resilience of what to what and why? Why are we doing that? There's also a lot of different types of resilience. We can look at resilience in a very superficial way using an indicator like we measure the economy with GDP, and we can have a simplistic number, or we can look at the breadth of our systems. But like GDP, the systems we're looking at don't have well-defined boundaries, and even less so than GDP. So trying to understand where are the geographic boundaries, what are the thematic boundaries, recognizing that no one person is an island and completely self-sufficient. We rely on each other. So it's really looking at those relationships, the partnerships between people to measure the resilience. And doing this in a way that's hopefully as consistent as possible in order to be able to measure what's working and get the evidence in order to make our work really effective. So I think there's a lot to be done towards convergement, harmonization among tools, and really a shared understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then, of course, engaging all the people we're working with, we're measuring from, ensuring that it's a really participatory process. So I'm really excited to be here to discuss some of these things and see this system and resilience measurement evolve over time. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I'm going to sneak in a question about the Market Systems Resilience Index that you've been working on. Could you share some of the reflections and the early lessons that you've got from the field? I know you've been going to the field fairly frequently, so it would be good to hear some of your insights.
Yeah, happy to. So we've been measuring market systems resilience for about 3 years now. The evolution of resilience usually started at the household level, but recognizing, again, as I said, it's all the interplay between people. We've been looking at the market systems resilience, and we've developed our market systems resilience index tool. We are using this in 7 countries across Africa and Asia. I just got back from Mozambique, where I was visiting some of the communities we're working with in northeastern Mozambique. And we use 11 different determinants of resilience. Again, you can simplify it into a single number, or you can look at all the different components. And I think it's important to do multiple levels. So we look at things, some standard or maybe obvious approaches, such as how does a person or a system measure up on redundancy or diversity or inclusion. And it's been really interesting to see, we look at the different market actors in a system, so the producers, the inputs, output suppliers, those, et cetera. And what we look at is we try to coordinate things like, do the market actors think that they're involving and having inclusion in integration and feedback loops with the producers that they're selling to? We ask similar questions at the producer level, saying, do you get access to these products? Are they tailored to you, particularly with systemically excluded groups? And that's been really interesting to find that people sometimes think they are doing this, and especially at the more local agro dealer side, there is some good evidence that they are working to make sure that they are reaching the last mile, but it's still pretty low. And then as soon as you go to the retailers and the higher levels, you're really seeing that they're really disconnected with the market, and that's creating both low resilience, but it's also an opportunity to better engage them. So that was really interesting to see how thin and weak the market was in Mozambique, especially in the north, that there's both there is that weakness, but also that there is a possibility to really engage and bring people there, and that there is a market that they could gain from. Thank you.
In my kind of awareness, the system that we've built out most thoroughly would be market systems. John spoke about that briefly earlier. I think if he had a longer time to present, you would have seen a very complex but brilliant framework of market system and what makes it resilient, structural aspects, behavioral aspects, really quite illuminating and building our awareness of just how these things work. I would say, from a USAID and a donor perspective, great start. It's almost in the realm of contextual research. We're able to understand the resilience of a system and possibly understand trends for that system, positive and negative.
Yeah, hi, Colin from One Acre Fund. We do work with smallholder farmers, and we're trying to figure out how to measure resilience for smallholders. And one of the challenges we're facing is how to figure out the resilience threshold. So at what point does a household, or maybe community, if we need to go a little larger, spiral downwards beyond hope? So maybe this is a question for you, Leah, or maybe John, but we're literally trying to figure this out. So if anyone has a good answer, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, a lot of the resilience measurement, I think, that has happened so far has been kind of from on high. Big studies designed and commissioned for researchers or consultants from outside. What you are aspiring to, I think, requires a slightly different approach. We're refining the idea of recurrent monitoring systems, which would be localized, use local enumerators. It's not a finished product, so much to be done yet. But the idea is that since resilience is most evident when a crisis is happening, so timeliness is critical. So to have on the ground data collectors, enumerators, researchers, what have you, who will be able to assess reactions from people, from businesses, from groups, etc., during and following a shock or a period of stress, to better understand how, their reactions, their behaviors, and changes in well-being for them, with an interest in to what extent any work that we've done with them, contributions we've made, whether that has helped. And again, this must involve local, the local research community and on the ground researchers. Thanks.
Sorry, I had given off the mic. John Choptiany, if you could share your thoughts on Colin's question.
Yeah, happy to. So the short answer is we don't know. It's not an easy question or answer to know what the thresholds are when people start spiraling, but we are looking at that. So we work with smallholder farmers, but we're also looking at the markets that they interact with. And as I mentioned, we've been doing this in 7 countries, and we're starting to do it. Well, we are doing it annually. We are working with the University of Arizona to study this problem. And we're trying to gather as much data as reasonable as possible so that we can look at big data sets and understand where there are lessons learned. And I think one of the key things, there's 2 main reasons why you would want to measure resilience. One is to track things, to see how things are going over time, are things improving or not. But one of the biggest things, and the things that excites me the most, is looking at what we can do with the data. So measuring in different contexts what's actually working and what's not, and can we have a somewhat loose recommendation system? So can we say you have a low resilience in this determinant, this indicator, this component of resilience, therefore this is what you could try. And it's important not to be prescriptive and say, if you have this problem, you must do this and it will fix everything. But as we're getting more and more data, we want to be able to tease out what's working and what's not. And the flip side of that is what's not working, and then thus what is a spiral, what's the threshold of not good enough. And of course, this becomes quite complicated when you have so many different groups. You can slice the data in totally different demographics, livelihoods, locations, et cetera, and trying to understand what are the sort of truths, what are the standards across contexts, across years, to be able to understand what are those things, what are the key attributes you can do. And we're using this in our program design and also evaluations to make sure that when you go into a community, you know that water's an issue, for example, but is the water access an issue for everybody? Is it for just certain types of people? Is it certain locations? Is the issue that you need more wells, or are there actually wells there, but they're not working? Is there a way that you can actually have productive use of that water? So it's all those intricacies that can be lost if you use a fairly simplistic measurement. So all that being said, we don't know, but that's where we're excited to be looking at what makes things worse and what things can make things better, and measuring that. So we're hoping by engaging with others that we'll build this data set across as many countries as possible and have a relatively consistent approach. Obviously, there's trade-off with balancing contextualization and adaptability to context versus standardization and comparing across contexts, but really studying those questions, because that over time will then give us some of the answers on how we can do programming better. So happy to discuss that further, probably at a different time, but thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Veronica Dorr from the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. And so Australian researchers have been working on resilience for a long time. And one of the key things that we think is really different about it in a context of climate change is that, we can't fully predict the impacts of climate change. We can't fully predict, the degree to which we're all going to mitigate or how fast. And so generalized resilience or systemic resilience becomes really important rather than specified resilience. And so to us, that means resilience is actually about capacities and processes for ongoing change rather than kind of specific indicators of what you have right now. I know in an event like this, we don't get to go very deep into what you're working on, but I'd really like to hear a little bit more about whether some of your indicators are actually about those processes and capacities.
Hi, Santiago Enriquez from Apt Associates. I wonder if you could talk about how you incorporate time dimensions into this. How do you sort of consider whether maybe like a short-term adaptation action is actually maladaptation over the long term, maybe linking to that uncertain future? But also, how do you assess maybe the trade-offs between communities that have very urgent needs today versus maybe investing in longer-term resilience? And even, how quickly can you measure those changes to see if you're sort of going in the right direction or not? Even from the USAID perspective, how do you, assess what's the direction of the magnitude of change that you would ideally achieve over 5 years, as opposed to maybe longer-term resilience in communities? Thank you.
Thanks. John, do you want to go first? John Choptiany, sorry.
Sure, happy to. Am I able to share my screen quickly?
Yeah.
Great. I will do that very quickly, just so you can see some of the indicators that we're using. That might make it a bit more actionable. So we measure things at the principal level, so structure, connectivity, support, environment, and financial of the market. We also break this down into the determinants, so redundancy, diversity, functionality, inclusion, integration, collaboration, feedback loops, enabling environment, preparedness, physical environment, and financial viability. We then further break that down into indicators, and then we further break that down into questions. So at the end of the day, this is a survey that we ask of people. And you can see there's different components here. We're trying not to be too prescriptive in saying one is more important than the other, but we do see things like financial viability is really key. If people aren't making enough money, they stop doing what they're doing. If there's not good inclusion, that is terrible, but it's not necessarily more acute. So what we look at is both the short-term and the longer-term resilience components. And that makes a bigger difference over time. We're doing the measurement at an annual time series, so that we'll see things over time, and we're looking at those changes. Some of these are sort of more on the process side, so particularly the feedback loops. Are people able to share their feedback to the market actors and vice versa, so that there is a change over time? We don't have the necessarily like all those processes articulated, so I'd be very happy to discuss further. we recognize that there's no perfect way of measuring resilience, but we're always trying to improve this over time and looking at the data of how we can improve it.